"I can smell you're fertile," the wild mountain man whispered to the poor woman, Wild West story. The sun had just begun its slow climb over the jagged peaks of the mountain range, spilling golden light over the forgotten town of Willow Creek. It was a small, almost invisible place, tucked away between the towering cliffs and dense forests. The town looked as though it had been left behind by the rest of the world. Its streets were dusty, the wooden buildings weathered and worn, and the few families who lived there struggled to get by. Life was hard in Willow Creek. Every day brought its own challenges, from unpredictable weather to the constant worry of having enough food for the week. And for a young woman named Clara, life felt even heavier than for most. Clara had grown up in the town, though her childhood had been far from easy. Her parents had passed away when she was very young, leaving her with a small plot of land and very little to live on. From dawn to dusk, she worked tirelessly, tending to her crops, mending clothes, fetching water, and taking care of a few chickens that provided her with eggs. Her hands were rough and calloused from years of labor, her back ached from bending over the soil, and yet, despite it all, there was a quiet determination in her eyes. She was a survivor. Even in a place as harsh as Willow Creek, she refused to give up. That morning, Clara had set out earlier than usual, carrying a small basket in which she intended to collect herbs from the forest. The mountain air was crisp, filled with the scent of pine and earth, and the occasional chirp of birds echoed across the silent landscape. Clara loved this time of day, when the world was still waking up, and the forest seemed almost magical. She moved carefully along the narrow dirt path, her boots crunching softly on the stones as she scanned the ground for the plants she knew so well. Each leaf, each root, each flower had its purpose, whether for food, medicine, or trade with the few neighbors who could spare a coin. It was then, deep in the forest, that she first noticed him. At first she thought it might be an illusion, the shadows playing tricks on her tired eyes. But there he was, a man standing among the trees, tall and rugged, with hair the color of midnight and eyes that seemed to see everything. He was unlike anyone Clara had ever seen. His clothes were simple, patched in places, and his boots were caked in dirt, as if he had spent his life walking through the wilderness rather than the streets of a town. There was something wild about him, something untamed and unyielding, and yet he moved with a calm confidence that suggested he belonged exactly where he was. The man watched her for a long moment, and Clara felt a strange mix of fear and curiosity. She had heard stories about wanderers who roamed the mountains, men who had chosen to live outside society, relying on their instincts and the land to survive. Most townsfolk regarded them with suspicion, whispering warnings of danger and strange habits. Yet, for all their cautionary tales, Clara could not deny the fascination she felt. There was something compelling in the way he stood there, silent and still, yet fully aware of everything around him. "I didn't mean to startle you," the man finally said, his voice deep and steady. It carried the calm authority of someone who was used to commanding attention without raising it. Clara took a cautious step back, her heart beating faster. "I've been watching you gather herbs. You know these woods well." There was no threat in his words, only an observation, as though he were acknowledging a skill she herself had barely recognized. Clara nodded, unsure of what to say. She was not used to strangers speaking to her, especially not ones who seemed so out of place yet so certain in their own existence. I come here every day," she managed to say, her voice soft but firm. "These plants, they help me survive." The man's eyes softened slightly, and for a moment, Clara felt a strange sense of being understood, as if he saw her struggles and her efforts and acknowledged them without judgment. "I can see that," he replied. "Not everyone survives the mountains. Many get lost, give up, or simply fade away. But you You have strength. That strength is rare." His words, simple as they were, struck Clara deeply. She had spent her life feeling small, unimportant, barely noticed by the world around her. To hear someone recognize her resilience was both unnerving and comforting. The man introduced himself as Silas, though he offered little else about where he came from or why he had chosen to live in the mountains. Clara did not press him, sensing that his life was private, shaped by experiences she could barely imagine. Instead, she continued her work, gathering herbs and occasionally glancing at him from the corner of her eye. Silas did not intrude, but his presence lingered like a shadow, steady and unyielding, watching, observing, and somehow blending into the wilderness as though he were part of it. Days passed, and Clara began to see Silas more often. Sometimes he would appear at the edge of the forest, other times along the narrow creek where she washed her clothes. Each encounter was brief, quiet, yet filled with an unspoken understanding. He did not seek to dominate her space or her time, yet she could feel his awareness, his careful attention to the land, to her, and to everything that lived between the trees. People in the town noticed her absences and whispered their suspicions, warning her to stay away from the wild man. But Clara could not bring herself to heed them. There was something about Silas that felt necessary, a connection she could not explain, a lesson in survival and in life itself. One evening, as the sun dipped below the peaks, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple, Clara found herself talking to Silas more openly. She spoke of her hardships, the loneliness she felt, and the dreams she dared not speak aloud in town. Silas listened, nodding occasionally, his eyes reflecting the fading light. Then he spoke, not of towns or people, but of the mountains themselves, of the lessons hidden in the wild, of the instincts that humans often ignored. He taught her to observe the signs of nature, which plants were safe, which paths were secure, and which signs indicated approaching storms or danger. Clara absorbed every word, feeling her world expand beyond the limits of Willow Creek. By the end of that week, Clara realized that her life had changed in small but significant ways. She felt stronger, more capable, and more connected to the land around her. The fear and unease she had felt at first had shifted into curiosity and respect. Silas remained a mystery, a man of few words and many truths, but in his quiet presence, Clara found a sense of companionship she had never known. It was a strange friendship, born of necessity and understanding, and yet it felt profound, like two worlds, one of survival, one of struggle, colliding and creating something new. The townspeople continued to whisper, calling her foolish, warning her to stay away from the man who lived like a wild animal. But Clara no longer felt the weight of their judgment. She had discovered a part of herself in the forest, in the quiet moments spent with Silas, and in the lessons learned from the land. She had found resilience she did not know she possessed, courage she did not know she could summon, and a connection to life that was both humbling and empowering. For the first time, she felt that she could face the world on her own terms, and that the mountains, harsh and unforgiving as they were, held more wisdom than the town itself. And so, Clara's days began to change. Each morning she rose earlier, moving through the forest with purpose and awareness, always aware of Silas's presence, yet never feeling intruded upon. Each evening she returned home, tired but fulfilled, carrying not only herbs and firewood, but also a growing sense of self-confidence and understanding. The forgotten town of Willow Creek remained unchanged to outsiders, but to Clara, the world had opened in ways she could never have imagined. The mountains had become her teacher, Silas her guide, and in the quiet moments between dawn and dusk, she began to feel the stirrings of something deeper, the beginning of a story that would challenge her, transform her, and ultimately define her in ways she had never thought possible. The days following Clara's first encounter with Silas were unlike any she had experienced before. The forest, once a place of routine and quiet labor, now seemed alive with possibility. Every rustle of leaves, every whisper of the wind, and every bird's song felt charged with meaning. Clara moved through the woods with more awareness, noticing patterns and details she had overlooked for years. Silas's presence, though often distant and quiet, had changed the way she saw the world. She was no longer just a girl trying to survive. She was a learner, a student of the wilderness, guided by a man who seemed to understand it better than anyone else. One morning, Clara set out earlier than usual, the sky still tinged with the soft pink of dawn. She carried her basket and a small knife, tools she had relied on for survival. But now she felt a strange sense of anticipation. Today, she thought, she would meet Silas again. She moved along the familiar trail near the creek, where wildflowers grew in delicate clusters and the water sparkled as it tumbled over stones. She scanned the trees for any sign of him, wondering if he would appear as silently as he had before, as if the forest itself had guided him to her. It wasn't long before she saw him. Silas was standing a few yards away, leaning against the trunk of a massive pine. His eyes, sharp and watchful, met hers immediately. He nodded slightly, acknowledging her presence without a word. Clara felt a flutter of nervousness and curiosity. She had been thinking about him constantly, about the way he moved, the way he seemed to belong completely to the land, and the way he saw her not just as a fragile town girl, but as someone capable, someone worthy of respect. "Good morning," Clara said softly, stepping closer but keeping a respectful distance. Silas's expression softened. "Morning," he replied. His voice was calm, steady, carrying the weight of someone who had spent years in solitude, listening to the world around him rather than trying to change it. Clara noticed how his eyes seemed to take in every detail. The angle of the sunlight, the movement of the leaves, even the small clumps of dirt on her boots. It was as if he could read the forest, and perhaps even her, with a single glance. They moved together in silence at first, walking along the creek. Clara's basket was already half full of herbs, roots, and small flowers. Silas observed her technique, occasionally pointing out a plant or a root she might have overlooked. His instructions were simple but precise. "That one's good for tea," he said, gesturing to a cluster of delicate green leaves. "That one," he continued, pointing to a thicker, rougher root, "helps with aches and pains. Pick carefully. It's rare around here." Clara listened intently, feeling a sense of pride at his attention. It was rare for anyone to teach her anything without judgment, without assuming she was incapable. Silas treated her as an equal, even as he shared knowledge that came from years of experience in the wild. As they walked, Clara began to open up. She spoke of her life in Willow Creek, of the hard work she endured every day, and of the loneliness that came with being an orphan. Silas listened, nodding occasionally, never interrupting, but his eyes revealed understanding. "The town can be unforgiving," he said finally, his voice low. "People see only what they want to see. They rarely understand the courage it takes to survive quietly, day after day." Clara felt a warmth spread through her chest at his words. No one had ever acknowledged her efforts this way before. The townspeople often whispered behind her back, calling her weak or foolish for living alone. But Silas saw something else: strength. By mid-morning, they reached a small clearing where wild berries grew. Clara knelt to pick them, and Silas crouched nearby, demonstrating how to choose the ripest ones without damaging the bushes. "The forest gives to those who pay attention," he said. "It's not enough to take what you need. You must watch, learn, and respect it." Clara nodded, realizing that her relationship with the land had always been one of necessity, but now it was becoming something deeper, almost spiritual. She felt connected to everything around her, the birds, the trees, the wind, and most of all to Silas, who had guided her without demanding anything in return. The afternoon brought a challenge. A sudden movement in the trees caught Clara's eye. A small group of wild deer had wandered close to the creek. She froze, unsure whether to approach or back away. Silas noticed her hesitation. "Don't fear them," he said quietly. "Observe. Watch how they move. They are part of the forest, just as you are." Clara took a deep breath and followed his advice, noticing the way the deer shifted their weight, flicked their ears, and drank cautiously from the water. It was a lesson in patience and awareness, one that Clara had never experienced in the structured, hurried life of the town. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, they returned toward the edge of the forest, their baskets filled with herbs, roots, and berries. Clara's heart was light, her mind buzzing with the knowledge she had gained, and her spirit lifted by the simple act of spending a day in the wild under Silas's guidance. When they reached the clearing that marked the path back to town, Silas stopped and looked at her. "You are learning quickly," he said. "But remember, the forest teaches differently to everyone. Pay attention to what it tells you, not just what you wish to hear." Clara nodded solemnly, understanding that his words were not just about survival, but about life itself. The journey back into Willow Creek was quiet. Clara walked with a sense of newfound confidence, noticing the town in a way she never had before. The dusty streets seemed smaller, the worn buildings less imposing, and the townspeople more ordinary. She realized that her life had already begun to change, that she had gained skills, knowledge, and a perspective that set her apart from those around her. She carried more than herbs in her basket. She carried a sense of empowerment, a growing courage, and a bond with someone who understood her in ways the town never could. Over the next few days, Clara and Silas continued to meet. Sometimes they gathered herbs, other times they simply observed the forest, talking quietly about the movements of animals, the changing weather, and the lessons the mountains offered. Their relationship remained unusual. A woman from the town, a man of the wilderness, yet it was built on mutual respect and trust. Clara found herself anticipating these encounters, feeling excitement mixed with a strange calmness. She began to see the forest not just as a place to survive, but as a place where she could grow, learn, and perhaps even thrive. Despite the growing connection, whispers in Willow Creek intensified. The townspeople could not understand why Clara spent so much time with Silas, a man they considered strange, wild, and unpredictable. They warned her of danger, of scandal, and of foolishness. But Clara paid little heed. She had come to realize that wisdom and understanding often came from unexpected places. The town's rules and judgments seemed small compared to the vastness of the forest, the sharpness of Silas's instincts, and the depth of what she was learning. One evening, as the sky burned orange and pink with the setting sun, Silas shared a story of his own past. He spoke of life in the mountains, of winters spent alone in snow-covered valleys, and summers filled with the songs of birds and the rustle of trees. He spoke of mistakes, of loss, and of the lessons that came from surviving without the comfort of a town. Clara listened, fascinated, realizing that the man she had thought to be simply wild was also wise, experienced, and deeply thoughtful. She began to see that strength could take many forms: the physical strength to survive the forest, the mental strength to endure solitude, and the emotional strength to understand oneself and others. As twilight settled, Clara returned home with her basket full and her mind full as well. She felt a quiet excitement, a sense of anticipation for the next day. For the first time, she did not feel like a powerless girl struggling to survive. She felt like a learner, a participant in something larger than herself, guided by a man who saw value in her, who challenged her, and who inspired her. The forest had become a classroom, Silas had become a mentor, and Clara had discovered that life could be more than just toil and hardship. It could be a journey of learning, growth, and unexpected friendships. By the time the stars began to twinkle over Willow Creek, Clara lay in her small, humble home thinking about the day. She thought of Silas, of the deer by the creek, of the soft rustle of leaves, and of the lessons she had learned without even realizing it. Her world had expanded, her perspective had shifted, and her sense of self had grown stronger. She knew the town would never fully understand her connection with the mountain man, nor the lessons the forest had taught her, but that no longer mattered. Clara had found something more valuable, a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, and the courage to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The mountain wind whispered outside her window, carrying with it the scent of pine and earth. Clara smiled softly, knowing that tomorrow she would return to the forest, to Silas, and to the life she was beginning to claim for herself. And as she drifted into sleep, she felt a quiet certainty. The days ahead would bring challenges, yes, but also growth, understanding, and a bond with a man and a land that had opened her eyes to a world she had never dared to imagine. Days turned into weeks, and Clara's life began to change in ways she had never imagined. The forest was no longer just a place of survival. It had become a world full of lessons, discoveries, and quiet wonders. Every morning she rose before dawn, feeling the chill of the mountain air, and set out to meet Silas. Each encounter brought something new, a plant she had never noticed, an animal's behavior she hadn't understood, or a lesson in patience and observation that challenged her mind. The more time she spent with him, the more she realized that Silas had a way of teaching that went beyond mere survival. He taught her to see, to notice, to understand the rhythms of the world around her. One morning, Clara found Silas standing near the edge of a cliff that overlooked the valley below. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting long shadows across the mountains. Silas motioned for her to stand beside him. "Look at the land," he said. "See how the rivers twist, how the trees grow, how the wind moves. Everything has a pattern. Everything speaks, if you know how to listen." Clara squinted at the vast landscape, feeling a sense of awe. She had walked these mountains countless times, but never truly noticed the life that pulsed through them. The patterns of nature, the careful balance between growth and survival, and the quiet strength that held it all together. Silas taught her how to track animals without disturbing them. He showed her how to follow footprints, read broken branches, and notice subtle changes in the soil. Clara quickly discovered that tracking required more than just sharp eyes. It demanded patience, respect, and a deep understanding of the creatures that lived in the forest. At first, she struggled to follow his instructions perfectly. She tripped over roots, startled birds, and misread the tracks of deer and rabbits. But Silas was patient, gently guiding her hand, pointing out details she had overlooked, and encouraging her to trust her instincts. Over time, she began to see the forest through his eyes, noticing patterns that had previously escaped her, and feeling a sense of accomplishment she had never known in Willow Creek. Their lessons were not limited to tracking or plants. Silas taught Clara how to build simple shelters, how to start a fire without matches, and how to find clean water in even the most remote corners of the mountains. Each skill was a step toward independence, a lesson in resilience, and a way to understand the natural world. Clara marveled at how much she could learn from a man who had spent his life outside the town, living according to the rules of the wild rather than the rules of society. She realized that the skills she gained were not just for survival. They were tools to help her understand herself and the strength she carried within. One afternoon, they came across a young fox, caught in a hunter's trap. Clara gasped, instinctively wanting to help it, but unsure how. Silas knelt beside her, showing her how to carefully release the animal without causing further harm. "Nature is not cruel, but it is unforgiving," he said softly. "You must act with respect and care. Every life matters, and every choice has consequences." Clara's hands trembled as she worked to free the fox, but when it finally ran free into the forest, she felt a rush of pride and relief. Silas smiled at her, a rare expression that seemed to soften his usually stoic demeanor. "You are learning," he said, "not just to survive, but to understand the forest and yourself." As Clara grew more skilled, their bond deepened. She began to trust Silas not only as a teacher, but also as a companion. His presence, once intimidating, now felt comforting. She admired his strength, his knowledge, and his ability to remain calm in any situation. And yet, despite their closeness, Silas remained a mystery. He spoke little of his past, and Clara did not press him. Instead, she listened, watched, and learned, sensing that there was a depth to him that could not be rushed. The town of Willow Creek, meanwhile, continued to watch Clara's absences with suspicion. Some townsfolk whispered that she was wasting her time with a wild man, that she was putting herself in danger, or that she was abandoning her responsibilities. But Clara had grown stronger, more confident, and more capable. She no longer feared their judgment. She knew that what she was learning in the forest was invaluable, and that her life was no longer limited to the narrow expectations of the town. She felt a sense of freedom she had never known, a freedom that came from understanding herself and her place in the world. One evening, after a long day of gathering herbs and observing wildlife, Clara and Silas sat on a large rock near the creek, watching the sunset. The sky was painted with brilliant shades of orange, pink, and purple. Silas broke the silence, speaking in his quiet, measured way. "Clara, you have changed since we first met. You move differently, see differently, even think differently. The forest teaches those who listen. You are learning to listen." Clara looked at him, her heart swelling with gratitude and admiration. "I've learned more than I ever thought I could," she said softly. "You've taught me to see the world in a way I never knew existed." Silas nodded, his eyes reflecting the fading light. "The world is bigger than the town, bigger than the hardships we endure. You must remember that, always. Their lessons were not without danger." One morning, a sudden summer storm rolled in, dark clouds gathering quickly over the mountains. Rain poured down in sheets, turning the dirt paths into slippery mud, and lightning flashed across the sky. Clara felt a pang of fear, realizing how unprepared she would have been without Silas's guidance. He calmly instructed her to find higher ground, to avoid the flooding creek, and to take shelter under a sturdy tree. Despite the fear and the pounding rain, Clara felt a strange sense of exhilaration. She was learning not just to survive, but to remain calm in the face of danger, to trust herself, and to trust the knowledge Silas had imparted. By the time the storm passed, Clara was soaked, tired, but stronger and more confident than ever. As the weeks passed, Clara began to notice subtle changes in herself. Her movements became more confident, her thoughts clearer, and her ability to solve problems grew. She realized that the lessons in the forest were shaping her mind as much as her body. She no longer felt powerless or small. Instead, she felt capable, resourceful, and resilient. Silas's guidance had given her more than practical skills. It had given her courage, self-reliance, and a sense of purpose she had never known in Willow Creek. One day, as they walked through a dense part of the forest, Clara asked Silas why he chose to live alone in the mountains. He paused, looking out over a ridge where the sunlight danced across the treetops. "The mountains are honest," he said slowly. "They don't pretend, they don't judge, and they don't deceive. People can be complicated. I came here to live simply, to understand life on its own terms." Clara nodded, understanding in a way she had not expected. She realized that Silas's solitude was not loneliness. It was a choice, a way to connect with life in its truest form. That afternoon they found a hidden spring deep in the forest, a small pool of clear, cool water surrounded by rocks and ferns. Silas taught Clara how to purify the water, how to use the natural environment to sustain herself, and how to recognize the signs of safe food and drink. Clara marveled at the abundance and wisdom hidden in the forest, realizing how much she had taken for granted in the town. Every lesson felt like a gift, a way to understand the world and her place in it. By the time evening fell, Clara returned home with her basket overflowing with herbs, berries, and roots. Her mind was full of observations, strategies, and insights. She realized that the forest had become more than a place of survival. It had become a classroom, a sanctuary, and a place where she could grow into the person she wanted to be. Silas, for his part, had become more than a teacher. He was a guide, a mentor, and a witness to her transformation. Their bond, though unconventional, was strong, built on mutual respect, shared experiences, and the understanding that life in the mountains required trust, patience, and courage. That night, as Clara lay in bed, she thought about the day's lessons and the growth she had experienced. She no longer felt the fear and uncertainty that had plagued her life in Willow Creek. Instead, she felt empowered, capable, and connected, not just to the land, but to herself and to the man who had opened her eyes to a world beyond the town. She understood that life in the mountains was not easy, but it was honest, raw, and full of lessons that could not be taught in any other way. And for the first time, Clara felt ready for whatever challenges might come next. The forest had become her teacher, Silas her guide, and she was beginning to understand the strength and wisdom that came from observing, learning, and respecting the world around her. Every day she became more skilled, more confident, and more aware of the delicate balance between life, nature, and human spirit. And though the town of Willow Creek continued to whisper and speculate, Clara no longer cared. She had discovered something far greater than approval or judgment. She had discovered her own resilience, her own courage, and her own path in a world that was suddenly larger, richer, and more alive than she had ever imagined. The days in the mountains were growing hotter as summer deepened, and the forest seemed both beautiful and dangerous in its quiet intensity. Clara had grown confident in her abilities, but the wilderness never ceased to demand respect. Every step, every choice mattered. Silas had taught her that living close to nature meant being aware of the smallest details, from the tracks of a rabbit to the scent of rain in the air. Clara had learned to trust herself, her instincts, and the lessons he had shared. But one afternoon a challenge came that would test both her skills and her courage more than anything before. It began when Clara ventured farther into the forest than usual, seeking a patch of herbs Silas had mentioned the day before. She moved carefully, scanning the ground for plants and listening for the sounds of animals. The air was thick with the smell of pine and earth, and the sunlight filtered through the branches in golden streams. Suddenly, she realized she had wandered into a part of the forest she did not recognize. The familiar landmarks were gone, replaced by towering trees and thick undergrowth. Her heart quickened. Clara knew the dangers of getting lost, but she also knew the skills Silas had taught her. to observe, to listen, to stay calm. A rustle in the bushes made her freeze. A small herd of deer leapt past, but her mind remained alert. She carefully marked the position of rocks and trees she could use to retrace her steps. As she moved forward, she realized she could hear the distant rumble of water. A creek or stream, perhaps. She followed the sound cautiously, using every skill Silas had taught her. Hours passed, and the sun began its slow descent. Clara was tired, but she refused to panic. She reminded herself that fear could cloud judgment, and judgment was her most important tool. Meanwhile, back in Willow Creek, concern for Clara had begun to spread. The townspeople had noticed her extended absences and whispered warnings about the dangers of the forest. Some blamed Silas, claiming that the wild mountain man was leading the girl into danger. Others feared that Clara was foolish, venturing too far from the safety of the town. But Clara, deep in the forest, relied on her skills and knowledge, recalling the lessons Silas had imparted about survival, observation, and respect for the land. She knew she had grown stronger, and she was determined to prove to herself that she could handle the challenge. Eventually, Clara came to a clearing near a small waterfall cascading into a crystal pool. She paused to rest, feeling the cool mist on her face and the soft sound of water against stone. She had made it safely, using her wits and the guidance of the man she trusted. As she rested, Silas appeared suddenly from the tree line, seemingly out of nowhere, his presence calm and steady as always. "You wandered far," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "You are learning, but the forest can be unforgiving." Clara nodded, grateful for his arrival, relieved to see him, and reassured by his calm authority. Together they examined the pool and surrounding area. Silas showed Clara how to check for safe drinking water, how to identify edible plants, and how to spot any signs of dangerous animals nearby. Clara listened intently, asking questions, testing her knowledge, and refining her instincts. Silas's approach was always patient, never harsh, and Clara valued that more than she could express. She realized that these experiences were shaping her into a person who could face challenges with confidence, resilience, and careful observation. The next day, disaster struck in a way neither Clara nor Silas had anticipated. A sudden summer storm hit the mountains with a fury. Rain poured down in sheets, thunder rattled the rocks, and lightning split the sky in jagged flashes. Clara was at the edge of the forest, collecting berries when the first drops fell. She felt the wind pick up, whipping branches around her and sending leaves and debris flying. Panic rose briefly in her chest, but she reminded herself of Silas's lessons. Stay calm, assess your surroundings, and find shelter immediately. She ran toward a nearby grove of sturdy pines, hoping the trees would provide some protection. Silas arrived just moments later, guiding her to a natural rock formation that offered better shelter. The storm raged around them, but under the rock, Clara felt a sense of safety she could not find anywhere else. Silas taught her how to position herself to avoid falling debris, how to collect rainwater safely, and how to keep warm despite the cold and wet conditions. The storm lasted for hours, and Clara realized that without Silas's guidance, she might not have survived it. She marveled at his knowledge, his calmness, and his ability to navigate the wilds with confidence. When the storm finally passed, the forest was transformed. Fallen branches, puddles, and mud marked the path, making travel more difficult. But Clara was undeterred. She and Silas moved through the forest together, clearing obstacles and helping one another where needed. Along the way, Clara noticed the forest's resilience. New shoots sprouting where trees had fallen, birds returning to damaged nests, and the creek rushing with renewed energy. Silas pointed out these signs of life, explaining that survival was not only about enduring hardship, but also about recognizing strength and renewal in every part of nature. The experience strengthened Clara's skills, but it also strengthened her trust in Silas. She realized that the bond between them was built not just on knowledge, but on shared experiences, mutual respect, and understanding. Silas, for his part, began to show subtle signs of concern for Clara's well-being, offering advice, guidance, and encouragement in ways that revealed a depth of care he had rarely expressed before. Their relationship had grown beyond student and teacher. It was now one of true companionship, though unspoken and subtle, rooted in shared survival and respect for the wilderness. Back in Willow Creek, the storm became the talk of the town. Some villagers praised Clara's bravery, while others scolded her for venturing into the forest. They could not understand that she had grown stronger, more capable, and more self-reliant through her experiences. What they saw as recklessness, Clara knew was courage born of knowledge and preparation. She had learned to trust herself, to assess risk carefully, and to act decisively, lessons she could not have learned within the limited confines of the town. In the days that followed, Clara continued her work in the forest with Silas. They explored new areas, discovered hidden groves, and encountered wildlife in ways that challenged and delighted her. She became adept at navigating the wilderness, recognizing edible plants, tracking animals, and using natural resources for food and shelter. Each day brought new lessons, new challenges, and new opportunities to grow. Clara felt a sense of accomplishment she had never known, a feeling that she was not merely surviving but thriving in a world that demanded courage, awareness, and respect. One afternoon, Silas took Clara to a ridge overlooking the valley below. From there, they could see the entire expanse of the mountains, the winding rivers, and the distant town. Silas spoke quietly, pointing out the paths, the dangers, and the patterns of life he had observed over the years. Clara listened attentively, absorbing the information, but also feeling a sense of awe at the vastness of the world. "This land has its own rules," Silas said. "It can provide, it can challenge, and it can teach. Those who respect it will survive and grow. Those who do not will struggle." Clara nodded, understanding that these lessons were about more than survival. They were about life itself. As the summer days passed, Clara became more confident, more capable, and more aware of the delicate balance between human life and the natural world. She had faced storms, navigated difficult terrain, and learned the ways of the forest. Each challenge strengthened her body, sharpened her mind, and deepened her understanding of life. And through it all, Silas remained her guide, mentor, and companion, offering wisdom without judgment, encouragement without pressure, and a presence that was steady and unwavering. Despite the growing respect Clara had gained from the forest and from Silas, tensions with Willow Creek remained. The townspeople whispered, questioned her choices, and worried for her safety. But Clara no longer felt the need for approval. She had learned to trust herself, to rely on her skills, and to understand the world in ways the townspeople could not. She was no longer just a poor girl trying to survive. She was a young woman capable of navigating the wilderness, facing danger, and growing stronger with every challenge. By the end of the summer, Clara had transformed. She had gained the confidence, knowledge, and skills that would carry her through the seasons to come. She had faced storms, navigated difficult terrain, and learned the rhythms of the mountains. But perhaps most importantly, she had formed a bond with Silas, a bond built on trust, respect, and shared experience. In the forest, away from the judgment of Willow Creek, she had discovered the strength within herself, the resilience of the natural world, and the wisdom of someone who had lived in harmony with the land for years. As the sun set on another day, casting golden light over the mountains and the town below, Clara felt a quiet sense of pride and peace. She had faced challenges, grown stronger, and discovered a world beyond the limits of Willow Creek. The forest had become a teacher, Silas a guide, and she had become a young woman capable of understanding and respecting life in all its forms. And though the townspeople continued to whisper and question her choices, Clara knew that she had found something far more valuable than approval. She had found herself, her strength, and a connection to a world that was vast, beautiful, and full of lessons waiting to be learned. The summer had passed, and the mountains of Willow Creek had begun to shift with the first hints of autumn. The air grew cooler in the mornings, the leaves turned shades of gold and red, and the forest carried a crisp, earthy scent that filled Clara's lungs with life. She had grown stronger, wiser, and more confident than she had ever been. The girl who had once struggled to survive in Willow Creek was now a young woman capable of navigating the wilderness, reading the land, and understanding the quiet language of the forest. Silas had been her teacher, her guide, and her companion throughout this journey, and their bond had only deepened with every shared experience. One morning, Clara awoke earlier than usual, the soft light of dawn streaming through her small window. Today, she thought, would be a day like no other. The air felt charged, and she sensed that the forest had something to teach her, something she could not yet understand. She carried her basket, packed lightly with supplies, and set off toward the edge of the forest where she knew Silas would be waiting. The path was familiar, yet the mountains always held surprises, and Clara's eyes were sharp, her senses alert. She felt a quiet thrill at the thought of the day ahead. Silas was waiting on a high ridge, his silhouette outlined by the rising sun. He turned as she approached, a small smile touching the corners of his mouth, a rare gesture that Clara had come to cherish. "You are early," he said, his voice calm and steady. "The forest rewards those who arrive with awareness." Clara nodded, feeling the truth of his words. She had learned to observe, to listen, and to respect the rhythm of the land. Today she felt ready to test everything she had learned, to see how far her skills and confidence had grown. They moved together into a part of the forest that Clara had only visited with Silas. The trees here were taller, the undergrowth thicker, and the air carried a damp, mysterious scent. Silas showed her how to identify subtle signs of wildlife, how to spot safe paths, and how to predict the changes in weather. Clara followed closely, applying everything she had learned over the past months. She tracked the movements of birds, recognized the marks of small animals, and moved with care and precision, feeling a sense of accomplishment and pride she had never known before. By midday, they reached a hidden valley, a place Clara had never seen. A small creek ran through it, crystal clear, surrounded by wildflowers and towering trees. Silas gestured for her to sit and observe. "This is a place of balance," he said. "Every plant, every animal, every drop of water plays a role. Respect it, and you will thrive. Ignore it, and you will struggle." Clara listened intently, her eyes wide with wonder. She realized how much she had grown since the first time she met Silas. She was no longer a timid girl afraid of the forest. She was someone who could survive, understand, and even appreciate the wildness around her. They spent the afternoon gathering herbs, identifying plants, and observing the creatures that moved quietly through the valley. Clara found herself teaching Silas small things she had noticed, the way a certain bird built its nest, the pattern of berries along the creek, the way the wind shifted before a change in weather. Silas listened carefully, nodding in approval. Clara realized with quiet amazement that she had become not just a student, but a partner in learning, able to contribute knowledge and insight to someone she had once thought knew everything. As the sun began its descent, casting long shadows across the valley, Clara and Silas sat on a large rock near the creek. The forest was alive with the sounds of evening, the chirping of birds returning to their nests, the rustle of leaves in the breeze, and the distant call of a deer. Silas turned to Clara, his eyes reflecting the fading sunlight. "You have changed," he said softly, "not just in skill, but in understanding. You see the world differently now, and you carry strength within yourself that others will never understand." Clara felt a surge of pride and gratitude. "I have learned so much," she replied. "But it is not just your teaching. The forest has taught me too, and I have learned about myself in ways I never imagined." That evening, as they began their journey back to the town, Clara reflected on how far she had come. She remembered the fear she had felt when she first entered the forest, the uncertainty of facing a man who seemed so wild and untamed, and the whispers of townspeople warning her against Silas. Now, those memories seemed distant. She had faced storms, navigated unknown terrain, and learned to survive and thrive in ways she had never thought possible. The forest had shaped her, and Silas had guided her, but she had discovered her own strength along the way. When they reached the edge of Willow Creek, the townspeople were waiting, as they often did. Some were curious, some disapproving, and others simply amazed by Clara's return, her confidence, and the stories she carried in her eyes. The rumors of her adventures with Silas had spread, and the townspeople were both fearful and intrigued. But Clara no longer sought their approval. She had learned that courage, understanding, and resilience mattered more than the opinions of those who could not see beyond the town's borders. She had found something far greater: self-reliance, wisdom, and a connection to a world that was vast, alive, and full of possibilities. Over the following weeks, Clara continued to split her time between Willow Creek and the forest. She shared some of her knowledge with the townspeople, teaching them about herbs, plants, and survival skills, and slowly their respect for her grew. People began to realize that the young woman who had once seemed fragile and unremarkable had gained strength, skill, and insight that set her apart. And yet, she remained humble, understanding that the forest still held lessons she had yet to learn, and that Silas's guidance would always be invaluable. One crisp autumn morning, Silas took Clara to the highest ridge in the mountains. From there they could see the full expanse of the valley, the winding rivers, the forests stretching as far as the eye could see, and the tiny town nestled below. Silas spoke quietly, pointing out the signs of life, the patterns of the land, and the lessons the mountains had taught him over a lifetime. Clara listened, absorbing every word, and realized that the journey she had taken was not just about survival. It was about understanding the world, her place in it, and the strength she carried within herself. As the sun set, painting the sky in brilliant hues of orange, pink, and purple, Clara felt a profound sense of gratitude. She had faced fear, learned resilience, and discovered the depth of her own courage. She had built a bond with Silas based on trust, respect, and shared experience. And she had learned to see the world with clarity, awareness, and appreciation. The girl who had once struggled to survive in Willow Creek had become a young woman capable of navigating both the town and the wilderness with confidence and grace. In the days that followed, Clara and Silas continued to explore, learn, and grow together. They faced small challenges, sudden storms, difficult terrain, and encounters with wildlife. But each experience strengthened their skills, trust, and understanding of the world. Clara began to see that life was not just about survival or struggle. It was about observation, respect, and balance. The mountains had become a teacher, Silas a guide, and she had discovered the wisdom, courage, and resilience that lay within her. As the first snow of winter dusted the peaks, Clara reflected on her journey. She remembered the fear and uncertainty of her first encounters with Silas, the challenges she had faced in the forest, and the lessons she had learned about herself and the world. She realized that every hardship, every storm, and every moment of doubt had contributed to the person she had become. She felt ready for the future, knowing that the skills, confidence, and understanding she had gained would carry her through whatever lay ahead. The bond between Clara and Silas had grown stronger with time. They shared a quiet understanding, a deep respect, and a sense of companionship that went beyond words. Silas had taught her not only the ways of the forest, but also the importance of patience, observation, and self-trust. Clara had learned to see the world with clarity, to act with care, and to appreciate the balance and beauty of life. Their connection was unusual, perhaps even strange to the townspeople, but it was built on trust, mutual respect, and shared experience, a bond that would endure far longer than simple acquaintance or friendship. In the heart of the forest, as the mountains glowed in the warm light of the setting sun, Clara felt a quiet sense of peace and accomplishment. She had discovered the strength within herself, the wisdom of the forest, and the guidance of a man who had opened her eyes to a world beyond the limits of Willow Creek. She had faced challenges, learned lessons, and grown into someone capable, resilient, and aware. And as she stood beside Silas, looking out over the mountains and valleys they had explored together, she knew that the journey was far from over, but she was ready for whatever came next. The town continued to watch her with a mixture of curiosity and admiration, but Clara no longer felt the need to explain herself. She had proven to herself above all that courage, patience, and wisdom were worth more than approval or conformity. She had learned that life was not just about surviving, but about understanding, observing, and connecting to the world, to others, and to oneself. And with Silas by her side, she had found not only a teacher and companion, but also a guide into the deeper truths of life and nature. As winter settled over the mountains and the forest grew quiet under its white blanket, Clara knew she had grown in ways she could never have imagined. The girl who had once struggled in Willow Creek was now a young woman capable of navigating the world, facing danger with courage, and understanding the lessons the forest offered. Silas had opened the door to a life of awareness, skill, and resilience, and Clara had walked through it with determination, grace, and confidence. Together they had survived, learned, and grown, and together they would continue to face whatever the wilderness, the town, or life itself had in store for them.